This is Slash here, the MLG Anaheim 2014 Championships. I am here with Nathanias. We're going to have the lower bracket finals going on right now to see who's going to be ending up as the champion for MLG. What has been your opinion of what's gone on this weekend?
The tournament has had some surprisingly interesting results. I think the series between Scarlet and Dongregu is going to be remembered by people for a long time because of the race switch that she did and then winning as Protoss. But most of the games have been okay. I think people probably a bit disappointed that not as much of the open bracket got, I think, the attention it needed. But that's about it.
What were your thoughts? Any big moments stand out to you as we still have the finals to go?
I really liked, I guess the biggest storyline is Scarlet's run. It's unfortunate that she lost to Trap, but Trap's been really good. And I think players like him and Ragnarok, especially as Korean players that don't get a lot of recognition these days, have made really good runs. And I think a lot more people should pay attention to them than they have in the past.
Does Scarlet being really the only Western representative surprise you at all?
Not really. When you look at the way that the groups were set up, most of the opponents were really difficult to deal with for both groups, and I'm still impressed that Scarlet got as far as she did because players like Life are they're almost picked to win any tournament that they enter, and the fact that she was able to beat Life and Dongregu, as good as she is, they were pretty big upsets even for someone of her skill level. So I don't think there's many storylines that are going to trump that.
Yeah, Violet and Bolt in the upper bracket finals that just were. They both live in North America, and then every other Korean player that came over was not able to beat these guys. Is there something to be said about these two examples of now moving to North America and having different practice but still being able to beat the best players?
And these guys have, and I've talked to them a bit. I talked to Polt and Violet, and they have a good practice environment. Their agency takes care of them very well. And as far as I know from my conversations with them, they still play a lot of the Korean ladder. They just play it with the blatancy disadvantage. And I started to think that if you can win with that disadvantage, then it just makes it a better experience when you play normally. So playing without the lag, I guess, somehow makes them better than the Koreans because they're so used to it.
That could happen. I used to play Quake with the high ping. We all thought we'd be really, really good whenever we got low ping. Of course, that never happened. So overall, what are your thoughts about MLG Anaheim, having Starcraft II back here, back at an MLG, back at a big event with a big crowd?
I think it's really cool. The North American scene, probably more than anything else, needs opportunities like this open bracket to encourage American players to show up and play. As much as, the top 8 is mostly Koreans except for Scarlet, but the opportunity that a lot of the North American players had, they were all seeded into pool play. Only 2 Koreans per group actually made it into the pool stage. So if an American player thinks, or if they put in the time, they put in the effort, the MLG did a really good job of setting the foreigners up for the best possible results, but it's still on the players to deliver. I think it's been a cool event, and it's really good to have North American StarCraft going again for MLG.
Now let's talk about Starcraft II itself. There's a current thinking among a lot of the players and people around the Starcraft II industry and community that feel like Starcraft is in an interesting place right now. Might be a little bit stagnant at the time, especially compared to other competitive games which are on the rise right now. What are your thoughts on for the Starcraft as the game itself? Its current balance, it's the current game design of it, and seeing over the years of how it's progressed. What do you think about Starcraft II itself right now?
I think the Starcraft II scene highly underrates itself. If you look back even just 2 years, people would say the viewing numbers are so much better. You know, streamers made more money. But every time you saw Protoss versus Protoss, it's 4-gate, 4-gate. Every Terran versus Zerg, 4 Hellion push, into tank push, into 2 base all-in. All the games were really predictable to the point where, even as a commentator, you could call a game without having to actually watch it. You knew every game with a Zerg would end with Broodlord and Fester. Every game with a Protoss then with just lots of Colossi in any matchup, and or a mothership core, a mothership Vortex. But the game itself is a lot more variety in builds, and even though there's not the impression that it's doing well, because I guess the naysayers of the community, it's still in every major esports tournament that's out there. They all still run StarCraft II. StarCraft II still has really good prize pools, and there's still dozens of people that are able to make a living off of the game itself. So I just think over time, and in the past few months, it's kind of started to show people are realizing it's not quite as doomsday as has been said before.
The game itself, are you currently happy with the way everything is right now?
I like it. I do. There's been some interesting ways that the maps, more than ever, have really affected the balance. We're just coming out of a period of time where, towards the end of Wings of Liberty and early Heart of the Swarm, every map was pretty much the same. But I think having the Kespa map makers come in, maps like King Sejong Station, they've given such different games. They cause players to make such wide changes to their strategies that it keeps the game fresh without Blizzard having to do a balance patch or someone come along and come up with some new way to play. So I think for the rest of the year, StarCraft II balance has been pretty good, but it's going to be heavily influenced on what maps are allowed into the WCS pool, since all major tournaments and premier tournaments follow that pool specifically.
Is there anything that you would like to see be implemented among the balance or straight up game design? And do you think this needs to come before Legacy of the Void, or can it wait until the third expansion is out?
I think the biggest focus for Heart of the Swarm, as far as if you wanted to improve anything or if you wanted to fix anything, the game itself looks pretty solid. The most, I think, bothering things, like right now, a lot of pro gamers would say Terran versus Zerg, really late game favors Zerg players. But it's something that the maps can change. They did recently put out a patch that changes it. That's made it easier to harass in the early phase of the game. So it's hard to call if the balance really needs to be shifted, because Protoss versus Zerg has more variety than it's ever had. Even PvP has gotten really good to watch, and the ZVZs that Scarlet's played against Dongregyu, against Life, have all been a treat to watch. And even the series against Ragnarok had a couple of crazy moments. So I don't feel any of the matchups are so stale that it needs to be reworked. But I would just like to see Blizzard focus on continuing to take the community's feedback about things like map design, because I feel a lot of the success for the rest of the year will be if the maps can produce interesting enough games. Because I think Habitation Station is another great example of a map that is, as many people that there are that dislike it, there's a huge group of people that think the difference builds, the rush builds or the command center liftoff builds, they make it fresh to watch. You're not watching the same thing every game, and that's the most important part.
Now, you cast WCS. This is a new format for WCS this year as opposed to last year, but we seem to have the same results in terms of the top spots on the Korean players, pretty much dominating each of the regions. What do you think about the changed format this year for WCS? Is it working? Do you believe it needs to be revamped again for next year?
So the best part about the format change for WCS this year is that the people from the region have a lot more guaranteed qualified slots. Like, that's the biggest change, and I think it's done what it was trying to do, and that's give players opportunities. But there's still that mindset that it's like we should give the players a bit more, and I feel like it's important for players to prove their skill. The European scene is a really great example. The WCS America has a lot of Koreans in it. There's only one North American player in the top 16. But when in the European scene, when new players come in, when new players show up and make it into Challenger, there's always a lot of rallied support from the other players in the community. And North America doesn't have that cohesiveness. You have a lot of cliques in the North American scene as far as teams go and pro gamers, and it's very rare that a player does well in something like Challenger, or like a player like Neeb getting into Premier. They don't get quite the acclaim from other players. You don't have big names in the scene like giving them enough credit, and it's one of those things where you need to encourage the players of tomorrow to practice, so that when these changes are made, all the players that left last year, yeah, you can add another couple American qualification slots, but most of the players that are going to get those are players that were really good and just practice a little bit less now, but they still can't beat the Koreans because the time's not being put in.
Do you believe that there should be any change in the way that the format is run, or do you think it has been pretty fair to all the players involved right now?
I think I go with pretty much what everybody would want and say I like the idea of a region lock, at least based on like citizenship or residency. The storylines are still cool when you look at WCS Europe, that's managed to have more Europeans than Koreans in their top 16, because then you get great matches like Wellmu defeated 3 Koreans in his round of 16 group to move on. And that's something that people really like to see, rather than, oh, he defeated 3 other Europeans that are less known. There's not as much hype around it, but on the same hand, America will probably still, even if they locked it, you still have legal residents like Pol and Violet, but it has to be enough that American players are willing to put the time in to get better, because I feel like a lot of them, if that opportunity is given to them, don't realize in time that the practice is worth the payout. But I guess I'd like to see a region lock as much as anybody else.
And thank you, Nathanias, for doing the interview. Where will we be seeing you next?
I'm going to be doing WSS America, round of 16, like 2 days, pretty much. Yeah.
All right, see you then. This is Slasher. Stay tuned to OnGamers.com all weekend long for the MLG Anaheim Championships.